The headquarters of the Royal and Imperial Post Office Savings Bank in Vienna was built by Otto Wagner between 1903 and 1906. When Otto Wagner announced his conversion to the principles of modern architecture, many Viennese saw it as treason. Wagner was a well-established 50-year-old architect respected by high society. He had built a large number of Renaissance-style buildings, had designed, for the Emperor Franz Joseph, the decor used for state occasions, and had come up with grandiose plans exalting the empire and its sovereign, which were never realized. In 1894, however, Wagner was awarded the job of building the Vienna subway. This encounter with the machinery of the modern city brought him a new vision. He published his book, Modern Architecture, and became one of the leading lights of the Viennese avant-garde without entirely letting go of his fondness for the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He mingled easily with the royals, as he did with the likes of Klimt and Scheele, who in 1912 said, "The great paradox of Otto Wagner is that in his theory and in his building, he remains the most innovative and influential architect in Central Europe." The architecture against which Wagner had declared war won the first battle on the Ringstrasse, the very symbol of Imperial Vienna, which had been developed from the mid-1800s. The Ringstrasse was lined with buildings which epitomized Austrian power and prosperity, such as the opera, the theater, the university, the city hall, and the parliament. Monuments which resembled either Gothic cathedrals or Greek temples, which, as Wagner put it, confused architecture with archaeology. The less noble end of the avenue, the Stubenring, was only developed at the turn of the century. And it was here, between 1904 and 1906, that Wagner built the Savings Bank. This, the only modern building on the Ringstrasse, has an ambiguous relationship with the rest of the avenue. It is set back from the street on a small square, producing the effect of discovery or surprise. It was also so that Wagner's brutal facade would not upset the balance of the rest of the buildings on the avenue. The Post Office Savings Bank was opened in 1880 with the support of the imperial authorities, the church, and the Christian Democrat Party. The bank wanted to be the bank of the little saver, as an alternative to the huge banks of the liberal financial world. At the turn of the century, it was still temporarily housed in a Dominican convent while holding over 200,000 accounts. It needed a headquarters to match its success and its image as a bank that was different. Wagner's entry won the competition ahead of 37 other architects. A few upset entrants brought a lawsuit claiming the result was fixed, but their complaints fell on deaf ears. What interested Wagner was size. Since his conversion, he had been harshly criticized, and this was the first large-scale construction where he tested out his new theories. Wagner said, "The modern eye has lost its perspective for the small and intimate. It has grown used to long, straight lines, wide surfaces, and large masses, which need limited work and simple shapes." The other buildings of the Ringstrasse mask the real magnitude of Wagner's bank. Framing the main facade, they hide the two lateral wings. Though only part of the facade can be seen from the avenue, the bank, in fact, covers a whole trapezium-shaped block. It is a symmetrical construction built around 5 large courtyards which lend natural light to the building. To speed up the opening of the headquarters, the bank was built in 2 stages. First came the main section between 1904 and 1906, and then the more modest rear section, built between 1910 and 1912. The 2-year construction of the main section was a record for such a prestigious building, which, according to the norms of the period, was to be of monumental proportions with a stone or marble facade. But Wagner had a secret, a modern solution invented by him which allowed him to erect the monumental proportions in no time. It consisted of building brick walls which were cheap and quick, then dressing the bricks with inch-thick slabs of marble and granite. This simple technique produced the necessary monumental appearance, but with huge savings of time and money. In modern architecture, Wagner said, "One can no longer let the choice of a style dictate architectural creation. The architect must create new forms, adapting those that best meet the construction techniques of the time and the requirements of the era. It is the only way it has any true meaning." This dressing allowed Wagner to create an aesthetically clean style which kept some of its distance from one of the architectural tenets of the period, that buildings should be frank and show clearly its materials and structure. Wagner did, however, keep to this tenet in leaving on view the aluminum-headed iron studs which fix the granite and marble to the brick walls. However, the slabs were actually fixed with mortar and the studs were totally unnecessary. So, what in appearance seems so functional is in fact merely decorative. These 17,000 studs, which were never fully explained by Wagner, have been much discussed. Some interpret them metaphorically, saying that iron in the facade symbolizes stability or echoes the armor plating of a bank vault. Others claim they go back to the bossing in the palaces of the Italian Renaissance, a period which Wagner was particularly fond of. In any case, the decorative studs bring the facade to life without detracting from its smooth surface. The only features which really distinguish the facade from the rest of the building are the simple motif and statues at roof level and a very slight protrusion towards the square. In the plan with which he won the contest, Wagner had imagined a much more sumptuous facade. Statues symbolizing commerce and banking were to look down on a blue ceramic frieze dotted with gold, an image of the prosperity the empire was giving to the people. In the finished building, however, there was no sign of this symbolism. Sumptuousness gave way to virtue, half-naked allegorical sculpture to the 2 chaste statues at roof level. Once again, economy prevailed. Why do more when these 2 statues and all the decorative crowning behind them were only to be seen from down below? The 2 lateral courtyards in the main building are used as the staff and tradesmen's entrances. Wagner was fascinated by the idea of an office block as one of the main elements of the modern city. The 8-story bank was built to accommodate 2,700 employees and to be a rational and efficient place of work. There were no supporting walls, which allowed for flexible, open-plan offices lit by windows of huge dimensions for the time. This has allowed the offices to adapt easily to today's work requirements. The offices are reached by large staircases in iron and concrete. The iron was left on view, though covered with several layers of white anti-rust paint. Like the facade, the steps throughout the building were covered with thin slabs of marble. They were then inlaid with linoleum, a new durable material which was easy to replace and easy to clean. Wagner was obsessed with cleanliness, which he thought a necessity for modern man. He insisted on installing 25 cloakrooms, 175 hand basins, 178 toilets, and 28 urinals. This hospital-like precision was meant to create the perfect building for the modern, disciplined worker. In these immaculate offices, noted a journalist of the time, the lazy worker will never escape the eye of the controller. Deep in the basement is one of the essential parts of the bank, the safety deposit box vault. Money, the real machinery of the firm. The architect had almost forgotten this was first and foremost a bank. The public entrance, marked by a simple glass awning supported by 6 aluminum-covered cast-iron columns, is as discreet as it is elegant. Inside, a wide staircase, also covered in marble slabs inlaid with linoleum, takes customers to a corridor, a kind of antechamber before the discovery of the core of the bank's activity, the banking hall, where the saver comes to deposit. What is unnoticeable from the outside is that this was one of the most original spaces built in Europe at the time. The ceiling of the hall is an arch of glass which appears to be supported by cast iron pillars, giving an industrial feel to the place. The tops of the pillars pass right through the glass and reappear on the other side. This transparency gives an air of mystery, of the material suddenly dematerialized. But again, what appears to be a visual effect is in fact very functional. The pillars do not support the glass roof at all, but a second glass roof above this one on the second floor, which is for isolation and protection. In the original plans, this protective second roof was to have crowned the building and been decorated with the imperial double-headed eagle. But Wagner abandoned the idea as it interfered with his new notion of modesty and discipline. He lowered the roof and covered the upper walls of the well in ceramic tiles so as to reflect the maximum light. The effect was more modest and more economical, but it also produced more light. Though remarkable, the banking hall was a reworking of what had become normal practice in bank architecture. From the mid-1800s, the large European banks had been welcoming their customers under glass roofs. The headquarters of the Crédit Lyonnais in Paris is one of the most spectacular examples. This idea, originally used in department stores, gave maximum natural lighting which reached the basement via slabs of glass in the floor. But Wagner treated his banking hall differently. Instead of the sumptuousness of the department store, here we find an economical and functional space more akin to a factory or railway station, as though the architect had taken one of the small stations he had built for the Vienna subway 10 years earlier and placed it inside a bank. The shape of the banking hall is based on the shape of early Christian basilicas, with a high central nave flanked by two lower ones. From the mid-1800s, this design had been used everywhere in exhibition halls, stations, and factories. The banking hall was to be as functional as the shop floor of a factory. Consequently, the money and counters were pushed into the lateral naves so as not to disturb the purity of the central space marked out by the iron pillars. Wagner claimed, works of art must always be a reflection of their time. Around the outside of the hall are certain objects which seem to belong more to science fiction than to a bank. They are, in fact, the aluminum radiators of the central heating system. The industrial manufacture of aluminum had recently been developed by an Austrian scientist. Only 6,000 tons were being produced each year, and it was one of Wagner's favorite materials for its fashionable look and the ease with which it could be cleaned. He studded his iron pillars with this metal, as he had done on the facade, purely for decorative purposes. The modern world based on anonymity and speed had only one fault in Wagner's eyes, a distinct lack of orientation. He called this the painful uncertainty. Thus, the floor markings are much more than a decorative motif. They are there to indicate the principal direction of movement in his architecture. Wagner once remarked, "Nothing can be beautiful if it is not functional." In practice, however, we have seen how Wagner did not always stick to his own rules, how he only strictly applied them in the work areas, like here under the glass of the banking hall, or up in the mail room, where there are the same pillars as downstairs, only with no aluminum studs. Marble, aluminum, or linoleum, Wagner chose only monochrome. The splash of color in the entrance is in the blue ceramic as a background for the bust of the emperor. This is not down to chance, because for Wagner, color was a code. It was the privilege of the boss. At the bottom of the stairs to the director's office is a red sofa and a carpet instead of linoleum. Like other innovative architects at the turn of the century, Wagner designed his building as a total work. All of the plans were drawn by him. In the furniture, we find all his useful trademarks: minimal decoration, one material placed on another. Again, function justifies the practice, as these plates limit wear and tear on the arms of the chairs. Whether for reasons of economy or form, one cannot say, but the chairs of the bank differ in size and comfort according to hierarchy. Armchair with cushion for the bosses. Armchair with no cushion for managers. Then without armrest protection. Then without arms. Until finally the back disappears, leaving only the stools for the lowly employees and the customers. Wagner's color coding followed strict lines, no mixtures, one color per place depending on importance. The director's office is red, very red. Thus, said a journalist, a visitor here, having left the white spaces of the bank, is meant to know where he is. It gives him a moral shock, which forces him to stand up straight. Once the shock is over, the visitor can study the refinement and attention to detail in the light switches, door handles, the clock, and even the central heating. In 1910, as planned, Wagner started building the second part of the bank. Strangely, this partisan of the smooth facade did not seek to join the two halves. On the contrary, he left a considerable cleft between the two, as though he wished to keep them apart. This second half was built with its own main entrance to allow customers to go directly to the stocks and shares trading room. What's interesting is that there is no interior passage between the rear building, with its better-off customers, and the main part of the bank. The treatment of this smaller and more confidential space remains both elegant and original, especially in this typically eclectic mix of classy frosted glass and simple security grille. However, here we do not find the same space and simplicity as we do in the banking hall, where the lack of decoration signaled a veritable turning point in modern architecture. Wagner told us, architecture must stop imitating the styles of the past. It must become a true reflection of our time, expressing simplicity, a functional nature, and, dare I say, even the military precision of modern life. So why, in 1903, did the Royal and Imperial Post Office Savings Bank decide on this kind of architecture? Probably for practical reasons. Wagner had a reputation for constructing quickly and cheaply solid, low-maintenance buildings. It is also probable that the directors of the bank were thinking in terms of image, and an innovative choice would distinguish them from their competitors. But was it only a question of commercial strategy? The savings bank had at that time close links to the Christian Democrats, a populist party which was anti-liberal, anti-capitalist, and anti-Semitic, and which saw in this new bank a chance to counterbalance the power of the Jewish and liberal banking establishments known as the Rothschild Party. George Koch, founder of the Savings Bank, whose bust was unveiled with great pomp in 1913 by the Christian Democrat Municipal Council of Vienna, was an important figure in the anti-Semitic movement. Should we interpret the choice of Wagner as an ideological one? A choice of Austrian transparency and honesty over cosmopolitan liberal Jewish opulence? Revolutionary architecture for reactionary politics. Was that impossible for Wagner, who wanted to be both an architect of the old empire and a builder of the modern age? This hypothesis reminds us that modernity is not in itself a value, and that in architecture there are often other things at stake.